The World Tomorrow. The Worldwide Church of God presents Herbert W. Armstrong.
And I'm here to bring you the truth. No one else is telling you the things that God is telling you through me. He's speaking through me.
The Lord let me experience what it is to be a new bride. You know, I'm not worried about what I'm about to say, though it may be graphic. We're coming to the Lord, and if you can take it, beyond the veil is the chamber. That's the wedding chamber. The Lord told me that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cult Next Door podcast. I am Maddie Laster. Before we get started today, quick reminder, go and follow us on our socials. TikTok, it's back. So go follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. We've got our Patreon. Speaking of our Patreon, I want to do our double portion club shout outs real quick. So shout out to Chase and Shanda. Shout out to David Brown. Shout out to Heather Bartlett. And new shout out to Carla. Thank you all for supporting the podcast. You guys deserve a double portion. So thank you very much for your support. Speaking of our Patreon, if any of you listeners want to go support the podcast, we got a couple different tiers there. You can either be in the double portion club, or you can just do a regular, I think it's $5 a month podcast support if you like what we're doing. Also, if you haven't already, go leave us a rating and review. And like I always say, 5 stars only, please. If you've got 1 stars, keep them to yourselves. Just, bury it deep down inside. But if you've got a 5, please do share. Speaking of 5-star reviews, I want to read one from Cody McG1. It says, if you have left a high control situation and find yourself without community, this podcast will help you feel less alone in the world. Thank you, Matthew, Ashley, and all of your guests for your vulnerability and transparency. You have made an impact on me, and I'm sure there are many more who will find a sense of being not the only one on this type of journey. Thank you very much for that review, Cody. Really appreciate that. We love hearing these kind of things from our listeners. It does more than you all know. So, today's episode, we talked to Brittney, who was a former member of Crusade Church for many, many years. I think we're talking just less than 20, long time. So we talked about her time in Crusade Church, how she came to even learn about the Crusade Church, what it was like as a member, the love move, we talk about that a bit, and then eventually how she found her way out of Crusade Church. So without further ado, here is part 1 with Brittney. So Brittney, how did you even hear about Crusade and start coming in the first place? Because it's how long, what year did you start coming?
2003, I believe.
Wow.
My oldest said it was like 2002 we started like visiting. I've always known that it's 2003.
Long time.
That was when I was baptized into the church. The first time that I met Jen, because she's a big part of my story, she was working in a classroom. She was just she was so funny, she's just that type of person. She can entertain a crowd. Your sister can. Now, the first time that I met her, I was like, just been popping in and out of classrooms and stuff. She didn't say a word to me, but then we ended up in the same classroom, and we were with another individual, and her and your sister just hit it off. And downtime was nap time. And so we'd get all the kids to sleep and stuff. And we would just talk and discuss. And I didn't really discuss my personal life a lot. I talked about my girls. So she knew that about me. Somehow, I'm sure I brought it up to someone. And Jen didn't know about that I was living with a guy. It wasn't harsh what she said to me. It was just, I just need to let you know that you're living in sin. And I remember that. I grew up in a home, and my mother was agnostic. We didn't go to church. She believed in a creator. She don't know if it was an alien, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So I remember talking to my mom and telling her about it. And I said, well, that's just what her thoughts are. And we worked well together in the classroom. She was just, I enjoyed working with Jennifer. We loved music. We always had music playing in our classroom. So something happened and they were throwing away y'all's literature. And I said something to her. The girl and your sister started having a Bible study, I think at y'all's house. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and then you were talking about like the literature. I think they were like leaving tracks and other stuff like around the
Yes.
facility,
And I
right?
don't
Kind of.
know if that was, I don't know which sister that was, but they were. And they would leave them on the table, and then other people would stick them on top of the Coke machine or throw them away. And it was
Yeah.
just ridiculous. The other girl and your sister were having a Bible study, and my oldest has a shunt, and I had to take her to children's and it always ended up that she had to have a surgery, but they had prayed and she had been healed. Something left an impression on me, and that your sister didn't date, I think, because your sister's beautiful, and she didn't date, left an impression on me. And I think that's one of the things, and just her character at work. She was a hard worker. She was always going, always moving, and our classroom moved well, I guess. They went to the mission trip, right? To
Yeah,
Africa.
2000 and oh yeah, 2001, right? It was like right after
Yeah.
9/11. Yeah.
Yeah. So they went on that mission trip, and then when she came back, she was in another room. The other girl she became a therapist, I think. And then I was in another room. So we were separated. And me and the guy broke up that I was living with. And I always put this off that I had to come out of sin for God to open the door. I always did that with my testimony, but I don't think that anymore. And I threw that out the door. My daughter wanted to go to church. She was crying in the library. She wanted to go to church. There was all these things piling on me, and I love my kids. I love my girls. And so the parent teacher conference, the teacher told me she was crying in the library, and we visited other churches, but it just didn't click. Your sister asked me if I wanted to have a Bible study. And so I started having Bible studies with her, and I don't think that lasted too long. I don't know. But then I ended up going to church the first time, and it wasn't the church. It was on Detroit, but it wasn't on.
Yeah, that's when we
Yeah.
were like renting. It was a Sunday
Yes.
church that we were renting
Yes.
it on Saturday.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a Sunday church we were renting. And so I went there, and the first time I went there, an older lady that was part of our congregation asked me afterwards if it was weird. And I said it's just like any other church. Cause I
Wrong.
attended church. Yeah, I mean, now I know. But I attended churches before, but they were like Assembly of God. So they were
Yeah.
kind of charismatic and stuff like that. So Crusade wasn't dropped to the floor out of the spirit and running down the
Yeah.
aisle.
Yeah.
So I thought that was weird. It wasn't a red flag to me. We kind of went through the motions and stuff. And that's with Crusade. It was a charismatic church.
What did you notice about Dad when you first came in?
He was very presentable, in a suit, and very nice and charming, and very hospitable,
Mhm.
welcoming and stuff like that. He was very welcoming. I don't think I always followed the way he wanted me to follow, even at the beginning, because he wanted me to be baptized quickly. And I told him no. So, and he was perturbed, but I just I don't know why I didn't see it at the time. I think I was just I was already into that truth, that because I did so much research. I'm that type of person. I just fixate on that. And then when I start researching, and all this stuff comes up on the internet. Because at that time we had the internet, but it was like dial up. at my house. And so I was researching things, and I was reading the Bible and scripture after scripture and stuff like that. And it all pointed to what he was talking about. That's what I focused on. And so when he acted out, I think I just pushed all that shit aside. I think, and that was just a bad thing to do. But I didn't see it until I came out of it, how controlled I was, because he always said that, well, you have the freedom to do what you want.
Yeah. I don't tell
Uh,
anybody what to do. I don't
I
know
don't
how many
tell
times we've
it.
heard
That's
that.
Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
That was
Yeah.
whenever he told me that several times. I'm not gonna tell. I don't tell anybody what to do, but he really did tell you what to do.
I'm not going to tell you what to do, but here's what you got to do.
Yeah,
Serious consequences if you don't.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you don't see those consequences until you're shunned. That's one thing I want to put up front. I have forgiven most people because I've been through therapy, and we just didn't have the tools to see it. I don't have any hard feelings about things. It's just I know that relationship probably won't go anywhere. Like, but if I see her if I see your sister, if I see her in Kroger, I'll say hi to her now.
Yeah.
But I had to work through that. I had a lot of aggression towards her and stuff, and it mainly dealt with my children.
Mm.
I'm still struggling with your dad. Every time I see that truck that looks like his, that rises up in me. And I still have a problem with Sasha and Al. I want to call her Allie because my children have a sister named Alex.
Yeah.
Mm.
So is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Everybody listening, Allie is Alex for this
Yeah.
episode.
They did so much harm together, those three. And Allie she's a young person. And if she does listen to this at all, I just pray. I mean, I just want her to get help. I mean, she needs to be in counseling of some kind, you know. And if the other two are listening, they need to be in counseling too. Your dad, I would go over to your house and stay till 3:00 in the morning, just talking
Yeah.
to your dad about scripture. And he was so knowledgeable, right? But I didn't know any other faiths really and their doctrine. I didn't know. I was coming into this as a person that was raised agnostic, but I seeked knowledge. You know, I remember telling my mom that I was going to go to college to figure out this biblical thing that's over here. So I seeked that. I wanted the knowledge and stuff, and Crusade gave it. So I think that's what was so impressionable to me and the community. I've never had a community, I guess. And I had just left a relationship, and I didn't really have anyone but my mom. And I had my exes, my girl's grandparents, which were they showed that was my girl's life best was them because they believed in unconditional love and they showed it continually to them. So my children were in a separate household, so I was divorced. And so they would go to their dads, you know, on the weekend, and they would go to, but really it was their grandparents. And so here are these people, and I throw this at them. I don't know. I was working at the preschool, and everything was okay when I was dating. Well, I was living with this guy and everything. And then, that scripture where it was thrown at us a lot that you will be persecuted. That was thrown a lot at me at the beginning because I was going through it. I was going through it at work. I was going through it with people that were at work, and they were telling me that it was a cult.
Oh, wow.
And then my the grandparents were all, they were telling her that I was going into a cult. And she was really into the holidays and everything like that. And then it just, like, she was freaking out. I knew her since I was 16 because that's when I started dating her son. And so she was like a second mom to me. The grandfather said, we're going to do what we're going to do. And that's it. Like, they were going to keep Christmas and Halloween and all that stuff. We're still keeping it. And you have no control over that. And I didn't. So my children lived in a different environment than y'all did. When all that was going on, your dad just kind of took me under his wing, and I would go over there upset about it. And, these people, and he pretty much would give me the story about your grandparents. Right.
Ooh, I want to
I
hear
think he
that.
preached. I think he preached on that a lot during that time.
And like what? What did he say? I don't think
He
I know
just
this.
basically, he said that they had to make a stand that this was the way it was going to be, and our children weren't going to keep the holidays. And if you can't follow the rules with it, we're presenting this to you. And this is how our family, we're following God first. This is what's happening in our life, basically. Like, you wouldn't go and celebrate Christmas. You wouldn't put yourself in that situation. That was what we were told. Like, I remember struggling taking a Christmas bonus at work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be praying, like, please, workplace, make it a holiday or end of year
Yeah.
bonus. Because if it says
Yeah.
Christmas, it's like,
I
you
can't
screwed
take
me.
it.
Yeah, you screwed
And then
me.
if you were found out that you took the Christmas bonus, oh my God.
Mhm.
Yep.
Blood
There
money.
was, yes. But that was, I think that's how I remember it. I don't remember all of it, Ashley. They pretty much, that you couldn't interact with your grandparents.
I know his parents moved to Conway, which is just, not that far, but enough removed that they weren't in town anymore where it was easy to see them. And I don't know the details, but there was a point at which we just stopped seeing them. I know I was close to them, or at least to Dad's mother, when I was little, but then there's this like massive gap in my childhood where I have really almost no memories of them at all. And there
Yeah.
was no longer a closeness. And then she passed away when I was 17. So I always thought that was like, she and Dad had a difficult relationship. They butted heads a lot. And I thought it was probably that. Like he's unable to compromise or make peace with people.
Yes.
It's like, it's my way. And if you can't
Or
be
no
all
way.
in with me,
Mhm.
then there's nothing. And
Yes.
I just assumed as I got older, oh, that's probably what it was.
Yes. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Because that's the way, well, I mean, later down the road, it's his way, I saw that, but I couldn't really see it until I came out of it, I guess, because your dad somewhat betrayed himself as being reasonable.
Yeah. But he was always very, very skillful at presenting scriptures in a weaponized way that didn't
Yeah.
feel weaponized in the moment. And it's very hard when you are in a discussion with him. It's hard to not be pulled in to that with
Yes.
him. I think he is so well versed in the Bible,
Yes.
he can pull out any scripture to support what his agenda is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to
Yeah.
the point of, separating
Families.
us, from family members.
Mm-hmm.
Because with Mom's parents, I mean, they were very grieved, but they took a different approach. I think Dad and his own mom had their own struggles growing up, and they definitely butted heads. And so she probably challenged him on all of this, whereas my Mom's parents, I don't think really provided much of a challenge to it
Yes.
because at that point they kind of knew who Dad was, and they were like, we're going to lose our daughter. And, I think I was the only one. Maybe Sarah was born at the time when they came into the Worldwide Church of God, but we're going to lose our daughter and our grandchildren. And so we just have to be quiet and bear this. And that's what they did, or else I don't think that we would have been able to have a relationship with them.
And they did up until everything that happened with you. I remember, I won't get into the whole thing, but the kind of the meeting where Grandma and Granddad came to the house, and it was kind of like the final butting of the heads, and that's where we had a gap where like we did not see them for years. But yeah, I mean, looking back at it now, even though I was younger, like they definitely, like they knew what they were dealing with as much as you could, but they were just trying to like keep it in check. But then when Dad did what he did with you, it's like, how do you? And they could not swallow that, where it's just like, you're not going to budge on this at all. Like,
but even then, they were still willing to have a relationship and just not talk about it, but have one with me and have one with Mom and Dad and the rest of you.
Yeah.
But obviously I wasn't there. But what Granddad and Grandma told me later was that they were told there would be no forgiveness. Those were the words.
Because they were having
a relationship with me, and because Granddad walked me down the aisle to, at my wedding to Kurt, that he, and they wrote that in letters to me too. Like, we were, I think somebody wrote deprived of getting to have this experience with our firstborn child. And I just thought, that was yours that you threw away.
It's like
you chose not to be there and participate.
Like, I don't know if you guys have seen that meme. It's like a cartoon meme, 2 panels where it shows somebody riding a bike and then they stick a stick in their front wheel and crash. And then the next frame is like, why did so-and-so do that? That's what this reminds me of. Like they did it to themselves and they're like, why'd you do this to us?
Yeah.
Like, you did it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So Granddad and Grandma left there feeling just devastated and defeated. And it wasn't just Mom and Dad. Some of the siblings were involved in that conversation and were some of the harshest critics of their character for doing that. And so they just felt like at that point, like they lost everything,
Yeah.
I think they still tried, but it was so strained. It was just And my granddad, he told me before he died, they got up. This was on a Sunday after church, and they tried to have this conversation, and it went south, and there was nothing else to be said. And they got up and they were at the door leaving, and Granddad turned around and said to Dad, "Larry, I tried to take you under my wing, son."
I remember.
You remember
I
that?
can see
You
it.
do.
I can like play it like a videotape in my mind right now. Like I remember that. And then when Granddad left, like Dad was just laughing it off. Like, what does that mean? Type thing. It's like, of course you don't know what that means. Like,
No,
but I remember that.
No one would take your dad. He was like the top dog.
But that goes to show that this pathology was there so early, because Mom and Dad got married at ages 17 and 18. And, I was born when Dad was 20 years old. And even then, like Granddad, just a quick aside, Granddad tells a story of when I was born, I lived with Mom, with Granddad and Grandma for like 2 or 3 weeks. Dad did not see me. He was like out in the woods finding God there's some weird story about this.
Right.
Living in a tree?
I don't know.
Is that part of it?
I don't
I'm not trying, there's no slander. I thought that wasn't it something living in a treehouse? Maybe
I don't even know, probably. And so then like weeks later, like I'm being brought home, which was hard for Granddad and Grandma. They just like wanted to keep us there. Granddad and Grandma like brought us home, and Dad had a German Shepherd, big dog. And Mom had me in my carrier, and she didn't want the dog in the room because she was afraid. I'm a newborn.
Yeah.
And Dad was like, no, it's fine. And Mom was like, no, Larry, like I don't feel comfortable. I don't, want the
Yeah.
dog in here. And Dad just kept like refusing, saying no. And our granddad, like, I don't know, you probably have met him.
Yes.
He's like the kindest, most gentle person I've ever met in my life. Like, you cannot imagine, like, he doesn't stand up for himself usually, or
Yeah.
he didn't. And it's he's so like peacekeeping. And he just said, Larry, get that damn dog out of this house now. Which was like the one and only time he ever stood up to Dad. But Dad did it.
Oh.
Which I was like, okay, there was still like maybe some time for him to not turn into a full-blown narcissist. But he did it. But there were other things where Granddad tried to help him, but his ego's like enormous. I was like, there's no way he's gonna take help. But anyway, that was kind of a little bit of that back history with Granddad and Grandma.
He was very proud of like the band thing. You remember he'd bring that up in sermons?
Do I remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a recording contract with Casino Records.
Yes.
Yeah, we still want to know. How can we find out if that's true? Because, of course, we bought it. But now I'm just like, well, I know he just says all kinds of things. Like, maybe that didn't happen.
It would be so cool if you could find some of his classmates and interview them on how your dad is in high school.
Maybe a record shop next to a casino tried to hire him. And then it turned into Casino Records trying to give me a record contract. We'll never know.
I mean, he was very talented. We have to give him that. Like, definitely could have. But I just don't know. Did he?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
because he said he turned it down.
Yeah.
Because of the Lord.
The Sabbath. Yeah.
And that was always brought to everyone.
Yeah.
And that went to you could lose your job. You need to find a different job. You don't break the Sabbath.
So many people lost their jobs going to the feast. I remember that. So many people being at the feast, knowing they didn't have a job or income to come back to after 10 days or whatever it was with travel.
Yeah. I mean, I had moved to working in a preschool, so I didn't have to worry about that. But I remember Jessica's stepdad did. Right? He had to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we had a couple or more people that either lost their jobs or, essentially had to leave because they weren't going to be given the time for the feast,
Yeah. You couldn't be baptized unless you were there like you were going to be committed. Well, that's a lot of things that I regret. I witnessed to people about this and I really didn't. At first I was like dead hard, the Sabbath and stuff like that. But then once I had relatives. I had a great aunt and she was a Christian and I knew she was a Christian. She kept Sunday and everything. And I started spending more time with family and that kind of knocked me out of that. I would still say that the Sabbath is a blessing that they're missing out of. But I didn't think that it was a condemning thing. But I kept that shit to myself.
You're like, I don't think you're condemned, but you probably are.
But part of the thing was the scripture that says the Sabbath shall be a sign between me and my people or something to that effect. Yeah. And so I know that was always used like, well, like you're not even considered, a Christian if you aren't keeping that. And then it gets even more minute after that about exactly what you believe and what group you're in.
Yeah. Well, once I came out of it and stuff, my oldest lived with me. And so we were kind of like bouncing stuff off of each other. And like in the New Testament, like there are people that are godly that weren't keeping the Sabbath. Like they were doing things on the Sabbath, even work. And God was not condemning them. My oldest kind of went off and researched worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
When? Like early on or recent?
No. Well, like, when she left that first time, she was pulling all kinds of shit off the internet, like the newsletters and stuff.
Okay.
She was pulling all of it. And she needed the last newsletter for Worldwide, where that split where they started keeping Sunday and stuff. She needed that last one, but the secret one, it wasn't the one they gave to the people of Worldwide.
Yeah.
It was the one that your dad would talk about, and he would say that they were telling the people one thing, but they were telling us who were in service another thing. That's what I remember. I mean, I'm not certain on all this, Matt and Ashley, because I get things confused, but
Did he talk very much about Herbert Armstrong?
so I would think I read a lot of Christian writers, C.S. Lewis. I think your dad introduced me to him. Mere Christianity was like one of my first reads and stuff. But Herbert Armstrong and all the Sabbath keeping churches, he would say they were dead.
Yeah.
He would pretty much cut that off, and that they didn't believe in the spirit. They didn't believe that in prophecy and this, that, and the other. And that's what we believed. And they didn't believe in worship, which is a big thing of Crusade, was worship. That if y'all wouldn't have done that live band, I don't know if I would have been pulled in so strong.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the things that pulled me in, was the music. And that's one of the things I love, was music. And I remember that was such a hard thing to leave, was our band.
Yeah.
Signet.
Well, and I think too, on the band part, like, it's not that we were obviously a particularly good band or anything, but for our background, we certainly were. Like, when people would come to the feast, like, that was a big focal point for people. Like, oh, they've got a full worship band and it's not just all hymns, because the people of our background, they did not do that.
Yeah.
So it's like I
visited other churches. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just hymns, or it was the Blue Book.
Yeah.
Of Herbert Armstrong's music.
No.
That's in every one of them.
So I guess what you were trying to say is, like, that was one of the things that pulled you in. So you've talked about the band kind of being a draw. What were some of the other things, like, after you started coming, and you talked a little bit about your baptism, that were drawing you further in and keeping you?
I think just connections with y'all. At the beginning, I had a connection with the Lassiter family, I guess. Jen was taking me under her wing and stuff like that. And it just felt good. I don't remember when it happened, but my youngest, I remember just having someone to talking to your mom about parental things. Like, she could cry. And I remember she got in trouble, and she was just crying and screaming in the room. And I called your mom, because I just couldn't deal, because you find out a lot about yourself when you start researching and stuff. And I would get overstimulated, and I'm just that type of person. Now I wear earplugs when I have to deal with certain noises and stuff. But I couldn't deal with it as a single parent, and I had no one to turn to, because my mom she just let me do whatever. I didn't have rules as a teenager, really, or as a kid. I don't remember getting a lot of spankings from my mom. I called, and then your sister stepped in, and she said, "Go give her the phone." And that's all I had to do, is I gave my child this phone, and she said whatever to her. Oh, she said, "Do you want me to come over there? You better stop." And that's all she had to do, and it stopped the crying.
But of course, your kid is going to listen to someone else. They don't know what the other person will or won't do.
Yes. Yes.
That's just normal for kids to behave differently with their parents than with someone else anyway.
So just the draw that I have some assistance, I guess. That was part of it, I guess, in my community because I leaned on that they would
Yeah.
help me with my kids and that they had someone to look up to, I guess. But I gave that, and that's one of the things that I regret the most. And I came out of that per se a little bit before I left the church. Like, because it started the policing with the boys. 2015 at the feast. So Blake's brother was there. Then 2 new guys showed up and they were younger, right? So I guess the little girls in our congregation were having a game. Who would hug Blake's brother the most? I don't know. So I didn't know about this. No one confronted me about this at the feast. And I don't know how it got back to your sisters, but it did. I'm sure I know. I'm sure it was Sasha and I'm sure it was Allie because I babysitted. So she would get her brother into trouble. Like one time she got him into trouble, but she was instigating it. Like she would instigate him and he finally blew his top. And so she would come crying to me. Well, I'm not like her mom. And I know that her brother told her several times to leave her alone. And I said, well, you go to timeout. She goes, why am I going to timeout? And I'm like, because you instigated it. Go sit down. And then I got on to the brother. But that continued with her. So I'm sure that was instigated by her. I don't think it was instigated by anyone else that with the younger girls. I don't think so. So after the feast, we got pulled into the was it the nursery at the time? Did we have babies at the time? Or was it still called?
In 2015, I don't think we did.
We didn't have babies.
Yeah. Where you go to
You go and
dressed
get in
down.
trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where you going to get in trouble, I guess. And at the Lassiter Lounge, it was the music room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
With the glass door so everyone could see that you were getting ripped to shreds.
Yep. So we went in there as parents, all the single moms that were there, and that was brought to my attention. And I said, and I knew my kid. I said, my kid didn't do that. My youngest was friends with Allie and another young girl in the church. They were all friends. Well, they were the youngest. And they would spend the night at Sasha's house. And apparently they weren't cleaning up their mess. And she didn't come to me as a parent. She went to your sisters. So that was brought up in that meeting. Something about, I think, dishwashing. That we were washing dishes too much. That I remember. I don't know. I'm off topic, I think, again.
Well, we need to come back to that, though, the dishwashing issue. But no, I think where we got off is I was asking you about things that drew you in and kind of kept you at Crusade, and you were talking about like the music, being able to talk to mom and like the help because you were at that point in time a single mother, like all of that. Yeah.
So okay. So that was the draw. Was the music, and your mom was a big draw. Your mom's she was so sweet, and your dad was charismatic, and he did a lot of scripture and stuff, and I was seeking knowledge. And just the fact that I had a community because I didn't have one. So that was the big draw to me. I think that was why. And my girls, the first feast, my girls loved it. And it was just us, and my youngest.
What year would that have been, that feast?
I think that was 2003.
Okay.
Because my girls were little. My youngest was little. She was 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we called her
Showbo.
Bo.
Yeah.
Well, Bo from Monsters, Inc. Because she looked like Bo. Was that the girl's name?
Boo.
Boo. Sorry. She looked like Boo.
We called her Showbo. But it had to do with that. And she hated it. But we still called her that.
Oh.
She was like, why are they calling me this?
Oh.
And I said, it's just a nickname. It's okay.
It's a term of endearment. I didn't know
Yeah.
she hated it.
Hated it. But she ended up hating her name too. So, but that first feast, we had lots of kids, you know. Well, you were young. You were really young. And
Yeah. I would have
Jess
been
and
15.
Chelsea. Yeah. Chelsea was there, and the young lady that were about their age, she was there with her family. So that was a lot of kids for a feast, and my kids loved it. They just loved
Yeah.
it. And they just, and my oldest, I always assumed my oldest wanted to learn. And she was over at my house, and we were discussing this before. It was not last, I think it was last weekend or the weekend before, but she was over here I said, I just need someone to talk to. You got to come over here and talk to me and stuff, because they're not living with me now. I was having a hard day. And so she came over where I could talk, and we talked about things. And I read her what I sent you. And I started thinking about something that I wrote, and there was, well, we visited 2 other churches, but she didn't like it because she wasn't learning. And I was like, well, that's just weird. Jasmine was 6. She was 6 years old, I think, or 7 when we started, right? And I said, that's weird. I said, and then I backtracked, and you put logic in there. It's because we visited other churches. That's why she wanted to go back to church, because I stopped going. But I was talking to her, and she said, no, you're right, Mom. And I'm like, I said, what do you mean? She goes, because her step cousin, was asking her every time he went to church, what'd you learn at Sunday school?
Oh.
And when we were going to these churches, they were giving her coloring sheets, and she was watching Finding Nemo and stuff. She was like, I didn't learn jack shit from these churches. And he's off telling her all, I learned about Joseph's coat and this, that, and the other. And so she's not learning anything. And she goes, you were right, because she wanted to talk about it to him, who was her friend. So Jasmine did want to learn. That was part of the draw into Crusade. That was part of their thing. They had knowledge. Your dad had that. He had knowledge.
Well, that was a point of pride
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
Worldwide Church of God is, we don't just give these emotional 30-minute, hype messages. These are lectures. We're learning. We're getting our notebooks out. We're highlighting.
Yes.
And we've got Josephus over here and a lexicon over
Yes.
on the other side. And we're looking at
Yes.
what every word means in Greek and Hebrew.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So that was my draw.
Mhm.
That was what I wanted. That was whenever I was talking to my mom. That was what I wanted. I wanted that. I wanted the research part of it, because I'm that type of person. So,
Mhm.
and so when that happened, and it didn't last 30, like I've visited other churches, it didn't last 30 minutes. It lasted multiple hours. And then you had a potluck, and you could discuss it more. And then,
Mhm.
and then after that, you had women's study. So you're discussing even more, So that was the draw. And I'm still that way. So I have to reel that in sometimes, because I'll get focused on one thing and I'll fixate on it. But I'm like, okay, I need to put that aside for a little while. So that was my draw to them, is that. And my kids loved it, They had children's study, I think, at the time, and your sisters were part of that. And and they made it, I don't think they were harsh. I don't think at that time. And I was trying to talk to Jess about some of this, like when that started, that the policing started. She said it was always there for them, but I guess it was a certain age. So I wasn't aware of anything like that, and I was coming into it, and I was so focused on studying and research and all that stuff. There was an issue that I was stumbling over something, I had feelings for someone, and I had brought it to your sister's attention. It was Sarah, and she was very soft spoken to me, but I didn't know that it would probably reach out to everybody else. I still think you remember when they did this single, like we had to fill out a worksheet, and we filled out this, I should have found it, but I forgot about it until just now. But it was like, who would you want as a partner? Do you remember that?
No,
And like you
I
filled
don't
out,
doubt it
yeah.
though.
I have that somewhere saved somewhere. I mean, put in some book, I'm sure. But it was like questions, like you would ask yourself that who you would want in your helpmate,
Ugh.
crap, and everything. But it was, I don't know. And that was another thing that was, we as women, and that's not just in Crusade, that's in multiple churches. And
That's in our society at large. Okay.
Yeah, that's true. And stuff. And my mother was very independent, and that's probably why I didn't ever listen to your dad. But he told, when my oldest daughter started questioning things, when he was being like, things were contradicting in the scriptures and stuff. Jasmine remembers a lot of crap, like scriptures, because she would sit there and listen. The youngest slept through the whole thing. And until she was 10, I think she was still sleeping until she was 10 in the pew. And I got confronted about it by one of your sisters, that she needs to be waking up and taking notes.
Oh my God.
But so I was somewhat of a different parent, though I was strict. I was a strict parent. I harped on that scripture about authority, and I wish I wouldn't have harped on that scripture like I did, because children have voices too, and they don't need that in their head, especially if someone puts them in inappropriate situations and they're uncomfortable. They should have that right to say, I don't want to hug you.
Absolutely.
But that was my draw, was the knowledge. And it was pride. I think that, I don't know. I think that I had a problem with that before I went into Crusade, and man, I'm sure that increased when I came at the beginning.
Just, you mean like the pride of having the knowledge, having the special place, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we definitely, just as a church, and that definitely goes back to worldwide too, like that pride of being in the in group, which is kind of like a hallmark of a cult. Like, they don't type thing. Even if you in your mind would say, well, I'm not above them, you think you are. Like, I remember feeling that way with coworkers. Like, I wouldn't like think that exact thought, but I did think that I was better than them because I was actually doing what the commandment said, and I was doing this or that. We had that really ingrained for years.
We did. And he would, that's why your dad he would preach that this isn't their last chance, because that's a hard thing to digest, that your family's going to hell.
Yeah.
So he would say they would have a second chance. The books weren't open to them at this time, but God will reopen the book to them, at the judgment.
And then they might go to hell.
If they refuse to, but then you're not going to remember who they are. I think it was one thing I remember. I know the music was a big draw, and that was a big thing for me, because it still is part of my life. I love going. That's why I love y'all's area, because of the concerts and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's hard for me now because everyone's moved. I mean, I lost my community. I left kind of before everyone else. I mean, my daughter, I had her, my oldest. But when I left, it was hard because I was losing everything. That's why I'm so glad y'all did this, especially because Ashley, your testimony and stuff, it rings so true. Sorry. To my heart. Because you lost your whole, I can't imagine. I mean, I had someone, my oldest left first. She left first. But she was researching it and she was like, this isn't right. He's contradicting and he's going back to worldwide, Mom. He's going back to worldwide and stuff. She goes, because I've read the papers and I'm reading, I found this and she researched it, and she said, and a lot of doctrine that we would preach, like the British Israelite thing, that doctrine is really racist. And I was
Very.
yeah, and I didn't never put it that way. I always put in spiritual, when we're out of our bodies. So I didn't really put it that way. But then when I came out, I saw how racist it was. And it's so devastating because you have these people that are different races that are going to Church of God churches and they still believe this shit. And they know it's racist because my oldest brought it up in one of the other churches. She goes, well, that's just a racist doctrine. Well, the pastor saw my daughter's expression when he brought it up, I guess, and he asked her about it, which is good. I think it was a good thing. But he asked her about it, and she said, well, I believe that's a racist doctrine. And one of the other individuals, which is such a sweet man, and he is biracial, he said it is. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so glad to hear that my youth, in the youth that's coming up, I'm so glad to hear that and stuff. And I'm thinking, this gentleman has been in this congregation probably most of his life, and he's had to deal with this doctrine, this racist doctrine. And it is not just it's just not in worldwide, it's in other ones. When we came out, my daughter came out first, my oldest, and then I left, and that was the hardest thing to do because I had to leave my youngest. And I saw it for what it was. Though it took me forever, but because from January when I had that first meeting with when I had that meeting with your dad, I didn't leave till June. And I was still corresponding with your dad, Matt, somewhat. I mean, not like I was, but I was still sending tithe, I think, and offerings.
Oh man.
But then when I started visiting other churches and realizing what it was and everything, I stopped doing that.
But before we jump into your, like you were talking about leaving and losing your community, I know obviously there's lots of time in between, your first few years and leaving. Is there anything of note before things really started to heat up that you wanted to touch on between, those early years and I guess 2018, 19, anything like that?
The next year, you remember that next feast, 2005 was a big year because that's when Sasha comes into the picture.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
that's right. Yeah.
that's her first feast. She was married at the time. And I remember one of the first things she said to me, because all of us single ladies were that's when we all had to like bunk up together and stuff. And so we were up like at crazy amounts of hours. I remember something had happened and we had seen some spiritual things. And that's where I struggle now. Like I've seen things.
Yeah.
I've seen things and everything. And what was that? And how do I explain that to my psyche? So I have to deal with that. And I don't think I was appointed a prophetess at that time. I don't know when that happened. It was when we moved to the church that it is now.
Yeah. Which I'm glad you brought that up because that's kind of a strange thing to think about asking. But, we had people in the church that were appointed like prophets or prophetesses, like you were appointed a prophetess at some point. Like you said, I don't know if it was by this year.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. Yeah, it
Like
was strange to me, I
what
guess.
what do you are you able to make heads or tails of that now?
Your dad called me a barometer because I would feel things and I don't know. I still feel things like this rush that goes through and I don't know what that is. I don't have a clue. I don't know if that's from God or if it's from someplace else. I don't have a clue. But I don't know if your dad knew that at the time. I was a young Christian when he appointed me a prophet is and it was after a worship service. And we were that was before we met in the sanctuary. We were still listening to CDs, but we used to listen to a CD, a worship CD. With
Yeah.
he pulled me aside and he told me that God told him that I was appointed a prophetess. And I don't know why that happened that night. I don't remember before what happened and stuff. And I said, and it was probably my face because my face is, I might not understand what you're talking about. And my face reads whatever that I'm thinking usually. Got me in a lot of trouble a lot of times. Of course, what I did when I got home was, what the hell is a prophetess? What the hell am I supposed to do? And I fixated on it. And I would pray usually before I would pray and I would flip open the Bible and it opened to Jeremiah chapter 1 and it talked about a prophet. I still didn't understand what a prophet was. I don't think until I really came out. But the next day said the same chapter, like chapter 1 of Jeremiah, like 1 through 9 or 10 or something like that. And something about coal. Do you remember this? Something about coal. So he touched my lips and he prayed over and he touched my lips. And I
Oh,
remember that.
yeah.
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 And stuff. And it was just with his, hands. And then after that, I was prophetess. And you being a woman, you're not like a man and you have to wear covering over your head whenever you give that.
And then of course Dad
And of course,
was.
Dad. He was the only prophet. He was the only man
Yeah.
that heard from God.
Which, yeah, that's a good point. I'm trying to remember. I don't want to misremember, but I don't think during the whole Crusade Church experience that there was another
No,
male prophet that
I
I
don't.
can recall.
I remember writing people and stuff like that, and I took that to heart. That was probably a pride issue, you know. Your dad probably knew, people that he knew that I don't know, he knew how to read people. I think
Yeah.
your dad just knew that and everything, and so I would talk to your dad a lot. I would say that I would hear things and I would talk to him or I would have dreams, you know, and I would talk to him about it.
When you say that you've seen things, like what's an example of that? Something that you've seen that you still don't know what that was or makes it hard to reconcile everything that happened?
That feast of 2005, me and another lady, an older lady that was in the congregation, and it was just, I guess, the ones that were in my cabin type thing were outside worshiping. We were just listening to music and we were worshiping, and I saw one of the trees, and they were like burning, but they weren't burning, kind of like Moses. And I don't know what that is, you know. Some things in your psyche, when people say things, might instigate stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of this, I think, was because that it linked to pride. I don't know how the brain works and stuff like that and everything. And some could have been instigated by a sermon, or I could just be crazy. I don't know. But it could have been what we were reading that instigated it. And that's where I'm at right now. And I don't believe that I'm a prophetess because I haven't predicted the future. And I don't believe that anymore. But it's hard I just don't know how to explain. Well, there's sometimes that I feel like during music, I kind of know now because I know that music, like there's different wavelengths and stuff like that. And they put things to make you emotional.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of put it in that thing because I heard that I felt that a lot when we were worshiping, like that rush, that tingly type thing. I feel it like rush through my body.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to explain that or why that happens to me, but it does. So I that's what I kind of blow that off as. But I still believe that there's creator. I'm kind of back to where my mom was,
Yeah.
and I know that there's a right and a wrong, but I think it's more to me now is do no harm. Do no harm to people, treat them with kindness. That's where our churches need to be. I read a book that really moved me away from what we were doing, and I started listening to Timothy Keller, which pissed off your dad so bad. And I started reading his books. I was reading a lot because I didn't understand. I was feeling all this unworthiness, and I was feeling I couldn't do anything right, and I was feeling hatred towards my brothers and sisters in the Lord. And when you come to Passover and you're feeling that, holy shit, it's scary as hell.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that, I think, with Chelsea.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is the scariest. Your dad made that so fearful that you could die or you were going to be sick or something devastating. Yeah. Yeah. And the first Passover I went to after was at a different congregation, and he said, we mess up. Even though you mess up, the Lord wants you here. He wants you here like an unconditional love type thing. And that was the first time I think your dad would say that, but they're undertones. He would always bring that scripture back in. He would say that, oh, there's grace, but it was a facade. There wasn't grace. We didn't have it. I would listen to different things, and we were all connected on Facebook, so there was no secrets, and I posted everything that I read, and your dad hated it. He hated it.
What did he say about it?
One time during a sermon, he said, that's when he would bring it up. He would bring everybody's faults out in sermons. Even people's secrets, by God. That was awful. That was awful. But he would bring people's secrets out into the open through a sermon.
By name? Or everyone just knew who he was talking about?
Sometimes you didn't know. If you were in the circle, you knew. I call it the circle, but if you were in the circle, you knew. But he would bring people out in the open and stuff. But I was reading Timothy Keller at the time, and I think I was reading The Prodigal God, and I was really just fascinated with this book because it was just all about unconditional love and how, Christ felt about us and stuff like that. And I was posting all the time. That's what I just posted all the time with Crusade, when I was part of Crusade, because I wanted to share the gospel and I wanted to share that part of God that I loved. And he brought up that you need to watch what you're posting on Facebook by different individuals.
Mm.
You don't know them personally. Their life could be in disarray, which was hilarious at the time, because I'm sure the Sasha thing, Matt, I really think the Sasha thing, my oldest, me, we cleaned the church.
Yeah.
We pretty much, that was my service to the church, was to clean. That when Jess brought that up about the Facebook page, that was when I left. And I gave it to her because I didn't trust Sasha. She would have used that for a weapon against people. And I knew that because she was prone to that. She would use things for a weapon against you later on. And your dad was that way too. I just didn't know it. But I just didn't know about it because I didn't know about messages that y'all were having as a family until I came out.
Yeah. So 2005, kind of blueprint for a lot of things. You mentioned earlier, like the importance of that feast too, in that Sasha and her family came in.
I remember she came in. I remember her telling me that, I just wish I wasn't married where I could hang out with you single ladies. And at that time, I wanted to be married. But I knew that God had to send him into the congregation. That's what, is kind of subtly undertones, that's what was presented as a woman. Since I was single, I would have to go to your dad, and because I didn't have a husband to go to talk to about my questions. So I'd have to go to your dad. And that, if I ever had to talk to your dad, your mom was always there. That rule followed. Your mom was always in the room. And she was there for a witness. And that was every single lady that was in our congregation.
Yeah.
Because of that scripture of the appearance of evil.
If you like this episode of The Cult Next Door, please leave us a positive review and rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified of new episodes.